So first thing I wanted us to have a think about, I always want this to feel a little bit different to listening to the podcast. And we mentioned very briefly on the podcast, this idea of locus of control. And I wanted to expand on this a little bit as a kind of bigger zoom out concept before we dive into control in your career. So there's sort of control and how in control we feel generally in our lives, in terms of how we live our lives. And then there's how does that translate into navigating your squiggly career. So I'm just going to give you some examples of having an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. So your internal ones are going to be the yellow blobs and the external ones are going to be the coral ones. I'm going to compare and contrast and talk it through. And then I'm going to be asking you for which one of these feels like the biggest challenge for you when it maybe comes to control. Because it's very rare that we have a full internal locus of control that works brilliantly all of the time. So hopefully this will make sense as I start to go through. So for some of us, we feel we take a lot of responsibility for our actions. So we sort of feel very in control of like, I know I can take action and I feel responsible for kind of the actions that I take. And at times, maybe in our careers or in our lives, sometimes we go to external locus of control where we maybe get a bit, as I describe it, blamey. We maybe get a bit blamey. And I can definitely think of examples of this. So, you know, sometimes rather than thinking, how am I accountable for this? What actions can I take? Very much kind of you coach you, what can I do? Asking those kind of open questions, we think, why did that person do that thing? Or why are that team doing that thing? And we sort of make it not about us. And, you know, it's almost, these things are never binary, they're never black and white. You know, we'll always veer in between both of these, but you might feel like you've got a slight bias towards one or the other. You might think, well, no, do you know what? The majority of the time I take responsibility for my actions. And do you notice maybe when you go more into kind of the blame game? Or maybe do you feel like you do that more than you would like to? And maybe you want to make that shift. So that's kind of one example. Another one about having an internal locus of control is, do you make your own mind up in terms of what do you think? Or are you quite influenced by other people? And let's say a good example of this one, and I bet you lots of people here can, I think this probably feels relatable to most of us at some point. Let's say something goes well in your career or in your life. Maybe you just go, oh, I was really lucky. Or it's sort of more about chance. So maybe you're more kind of influenced by other people, which is an external locus of control. Or maybe you go, no, well, I make up my own mind. And if something goes well, I'm going to give myself credit for that. Sometimes we find that quite hard to do. When you're faced with a challenge, do you feel confident about your ability to overcome that challenge? Or when you're faced with a challenge, do you sometimes feel a bit hopeless? Or maybe that there's a temptation to give up. Maybe if you've had lots of challenges in a row, you know, we all kind of have that tipping point of going, and that's it. I'm sort of, and I'm done. You know, and so how quickly do you reach that point? And this can be for loads of reasons. So we shouldn't be giving ourselves a hard time if that's where you are right now. But it's important to know, because then we can also figure out, well, what are the specific actions that we might want to do if one of these feels more like a challenge for us than others. Do you feel like you work hard? Sometimes this might be described as grit, but that kind of passion and perseverance over time to kind of commit to doing something. And you feel like, right, I work hard for the things I want to achieve. You know, you could pinpoint, you could give me examples of how you work hard to achieve the things that are important to you. Or do you sometimes think, and this is quite a fixed mindset, well, it doesn't matter how hard I work, I can't change what's going to happen. So again, we're sort of going, it's outside of us. And then the last one is just generally, do you sort of think, I feel pretty happy with myself, I feel quite independent? Or some of you will have heard this phrase before, of learned helplessness. So this comes from somebody called Martin Seligman, who's a positive psychologist, and he talks about the difference between learned optimism and learned helplessness, where we do sometimes feel that sense of, oh, it's just, there's nothing I can do here. And it's not a very nice feeling in your personal life or your professional life. I'm in a WhatsApp group, and I'll obviously keep it anonymous, of some very, very brilliant women who've kind of won this amazing award in the past. And they're all incredible. It's an amazing WhatsApp group to be part of. I'm sort of like the old person in that group. So I did win that award, but quite a long time ago, before WhatsApp was invented, but somehow I've managed to find myself in that group. So it's sort of really inspiring. I just sort of lurk there being inspired. And there was a message this week from one of the women in that group, and you could feel the learned helplessness. You could feel I feel like I've tried and got a very difficult situation with a boss, with an organization, quite a kind of toxic environment, and now feels this kind of helplessness because they've tried to do the right things, and now going, I'm sort of at a loss of like where to go next. So it's more, you've kind of moved to more external than you are in terms of, you feel like your locus of control has gone external versus internal. So the yellow ones here are all, let me do that in yellow, are all internal. And the coral ones here are external. So this, as you can probably guess, is a concept that comes from psychology. I'd love to know now, put a star on my screen, which one of these feels like it's the hardest for you to stay internal. So do you feel like, yeah, I definitely recognize that I do a bit of the blame game? Do I sometimes put my success down to chance or lucky? Am I at the state at the moment where challenges just feel a little bit hopeless, or maybe that kind of learned helplessness? Or do you maybe feel like, well, I have worked hard, but things are not changing. So I'm getting to the point where I feel like things can't change. Stars on my screen, for those people who are new, who are going, how are these stars appearing? You're looking for something on your screen that says view options, annotate, stamp, and then star. And usually Sarah or one of the team, Sarah's already done it, has gone in and put those instructions in chat as well. So just which one of these feels hard for you at the moment? Because as I said, this is not about going, no one, spends all of their time in their internal locus of control, because you'd be an incredibly robotic, unrealistic human. We all have moments. And I think one of the things that's helpful with locus of control, the more I've read about it, is noticing. A bit like when we're coaching ourselves, noticing when this is happening. Oh, I got a promotion. Oh, I must have been lucky, or I must have just been in the right place at the right time. Lots of people saying, yeah, I just felt quite lucky, versus giving yourself the credit you deserve to go, okay, well, what did I do well that meant that I achieved that thing? Or what was it that's brilliant about me that meant I got that job? So we've got to, when we give ourselves credit for what we have achieved, we build our confidence and our self-belief. So that one is really related to confidence and self-belief. If we're not sort of giving ourselves credit for our achievements and our successes, we kind of reduce our belief rather than build our belief. So this one here, worth knowing, we need to do this well, because otherwise we won't feel as confident as we need to as we're navigating our squiggly career. This one down here, this is where maybe I would guess for a lot of people, it's not that you don't work hard, it's that you are working hard and things are not changing. So then we might be thinking about, okay, so that's interesting. There are things that we can't control, and there are things that we can control. What might we then need to do differently if what we have done so far hasn't worked? Sometimes people talk about the difference between the circle of control, so the things you absolutely can control, and the circle of concern, things that concern you, frustrate you, annoy you. You can they're the things that you want to complain about, and good to have a good whinge about sometimes, but they are things that often it's hard for you to take action on. So just an interesting exercise to think about, or I found this interesting anyway, as I was sort of diving into this. And then we didn't talk about this on the podcast because we felt like this was probably diving a bit too deep, and visually I think works a little bit better. So sticking with those stars, and let's move on to careers. How in control of your squiggly career do you feel at the moment? So let me know, using the stars, where you are on that squiggle. How in control of your career do you feel? Are you like, I just don't, I feel out of control of my career, so maybe the 1 to 2. 3 to 4, some control, maybe probably not as much as you'd like. 5 to 6, middling. 7 to 8, feeling pretty good. And I would argue that it's probably pretty tough to ever be kind of 9 to 10. Maybe you have moments of that, but we always do want to recognize that in squiggly careers, there is change and uncertainty. So there will be things out of your control. So I don't think here what we are aiming for, I don't think our job to do here is to get to 9 or 10. I think our job to do is probably to get to 7 and 8. I think around 7 and 8, you are doing a pretty good job. And for those of you who've read Oliver Burkeman's book, 4,000 Weeks, about time, one of the things that he would argue, I'm sure if Oliver was here right now, is we've got to let go of the assumption that we can control everything all of the time. So I think if we were aiming for over here, we'd almost be setting ourselves up to fail. We'd be unrealistic compared to the environment that we're all working in, that are kind of we're operating in terms of our careers. So I think if you're 7 and 8, that's pretty good. I think below that, there are probably things that we can do to help ourselves. But good to know where we are. And if you're thinking about this, if this is really important to you right now, sometimes people come to PodPlus just because you're interested and you're learning. Some of you might be here because you think, I want more control now. This is a priority for me in my development. I would be thinking about how can you move 2 points from where you are to where you'd like to be. So if you're a 5, let's aim to get to a 7. If you're a 3, let's aim initially to get to a 5. Because we always find with career development actions, it's always incremental. You'll never go, unfortunately, from a 3 to an 8. But I always feel pretty confident you can go from a 3 to a 5 within a couple of months. And then you'll be able to go from a 5 to a 7. It's amazing how once you get started, you sort of get that kind of positive momentum. Okay, so you know where you are today, and we've started to think about where you might like to be. Let me know now, what do you feel in control of when it comes to your career? So what do you feel like you can control? Let me know in chat. Like, what are the actions, characteristics, factors that you feel like, when I think about my career, I can control X, Y, Z. I've done this exercise, so we'll see how this compares to my list. So head into chat. What can you control? Down location. Yeah, practical one. Great. Doing a good job in your current role, Sarah. Yeah. Always good advice, I think. Like, always do a good job in your current role. You can control that. Really like that one. Time you spend working. Yeah. Creativity and ideas. Nice. Really like that one. Time that you start. People in your network. Yeah, we're going to come back to that. Learning, your working hours, working hard. How you feel about your achievements, Victoria. Really good one. Not just what you do, but also how you feel. Really nice. Actually, Joe, I'd not thought about it that way. That would be a nice way to frame control. You can control how you feel and you can control what you do. So maybe there's how do you feel and what you do. Feelings and doings would be interesting, I think, as a way to think about control. Great, there's some people saying hours and time. That's great. I'm sure it won't be true for everyone, but I'm really glad it's true for some of us. The strengths you want to be known for, Lucy. Yeah, that idea of going, what do you want to build your reputation for? That's up to you. Only you can control that. And then you can think about, like, what does that mean in terms of how I spend my time and what I'm working on? How professional you are. Yeah, your behavior, Karen. Yeah, how you show up. You can control how you show up day to day. How you respond to challenges, things you come along to, your integrity, Danielle, nice, the content. Some of you will probably read these and think, I can't control those things, and that's fine too. But I think doing this is quite a good list to get you started. What are those things you do feel in control of? Yeah, your career is only part of your life. Great, Reg. There is a brilliant article on The Atlantic, and perhaps Lucy or Sarah, perhaps you could see if you can find it and put it into the chat, that Helen shared on LinkedIn this week, that talks about your career in the context of your life. And we'll try and find it. So we'll try and put it in the chat before the end of today. And if not, I can find it and we'll send it out with the resources. It's a really good read about careers, about what career advice is genuinely useful, and just the framing of our careers. I think it fits really well with this idea of squiggly careers. Yeah, I think it is that one, Sarah. Thank you so much for doing that. What feels out of your control? So we've done what you feel in control of. What feels out of your control at the moment when it comes to your career? Again, let me know in chat. What feels out of your control? Progression and opportunities, Jade, yeah. So maybe you feel stuck. Maybe there feels like there's some constraints that are getting in your way. Yeah, Francesca, what you work on day to day. So some of us don't feel in control of kind of the job that we are doing, kind of the content of our job, because perhaps it's not what we want it to be, but we don't feel able to maybe change it. Your email inbox, Lucy. I bet that's the same for lots of people. Pay, yeah, Portia. Workload, pay, interesting. I'm writing something at the moment about pay and squiggly careers, so I'll perhaps come back to that another week. Who you have to work with, yeah. Interesting. External factors, childcare, yeah. I mean, there are some things that are kind of relatively hard and fast. You know, your kid maybe has to go to school for a certain time. Those things can be true. Progression, interesting. Where you live for work, how much energy. Who's saying about energy there? Janelle, there is some really good work on energy that might be useful for you to read about. I think it's by, I want to say Tony Schwartz. We'll see how good my memory is, about this idea of energy. And also you don't have to give equal energy to everything. The way I often describe that is there are times when good enough is absolutely the answer. Like, I need to be good enough at this presentation or this day or this moment, and that is okay. And almost recognizing that and then making a choice about how much energy you invest, because good enough is okay. And then having those moments of going, when am I going to go all in terms of my energy? Because it's particularly important to me. I know it's where I add the most value. I'm trying to find flow. Certainly if you're trying to kind of do flow, you definitely need kind of all of your energy. Progression is coming up as a really popular topic. We did do a podcast episode on progression possibilities, about how to explore your progression possibilities, that I would really recommend if you've not listened to it. And the other one that might be particularly related on out of control, because you might think, and you might have already listened, you might be like, well, I feel like I've done everything I can on progression. If you feel like constraints are getting in your way, I'd recommend Adam Morgan's work on beautiful constraints. And he came on our podcast at the start of this year and talked about how can you overcome career constraints that might feel out of your control. Always accepting there will be some things where, let's say there's a job you want to do and that job just does not exist, or that person is just not moving. You know, you cannot change that thing, but there is probably still, in my experience, more that we can do to overcome constraints than we give ourselves credit for. And he talks about, which I always really like, how you can sort of use almost like waiting time, what could be perceived as waiting time, to add loads of value to your career. So you're sort of taking that create, don't wait mindset that we often talk about when it comes to careers and career development. But interesting progression in particularly. Yeah, spoon theory is really good about energy, Sarah. I love that. That's I was reminded of that in Bruce Daisley's new book on fortitude. He mentions that. So definitely have a look at spoon theory. I don't think we've actually talked about that in the podcast, but it's really helpful. So progression coming up a lot. Okay. So I was thinking, right, even if things feel really out of your control at the moment, you're quite low on how in control of your career do you feel? What are some things that you can always do that I think I've always come back to and thought, well, I can do this. There's nothing stopping me here. There's kind of nothing getting in my way. And I think, I can't remember who said it in chat, because I have lots of chat this morning. The first thing to think about in your squiggly career, the relationships that you build belong to you. They go beyond a job. They go beyond an organization. Lucy, who's on our call today, who works in our amazing IF team, Lucy and I worked together at Barclays. I can't even remember how many years ago, like 10 years ago, maybe more. Lucy and I didn't know each other that well. We sort of worked in adjacent teams. I was always like, she seems nice, but we didn't know each other particularly well. But we sort of built a relationship over time. And I would say particularly credit to Lucy, because Lucy's always been interested in her learning and her career development. She's sort of been proactive about continuing that relationship with me. You know, we both went off in different directions. Lucy went to work for Bernardo's, I went to work for Sainsbury's, but Lucy kept showing up to maybe some workshops we were doing, to a leadership program that I ran. So we sort of did that. You know, we've talked before about this idea of weak ties. Lucy did a brilliant job of just kind of staying connected, continuing her learning. That relationship belonged to her. Didn't matter where she worked or what she was doing. We didn't know we were going to end up working together, but it happened because Lucy took control. She took control about thinking, well, who do I want to build a relationship with? And it's not because she's necessarily thinking over all that time, oh, I want to work with Sarah. She was probably just thinking, I want to learn, I want to develop. And hey, you never know where those relationships can take you. And this doesn't have to be 100 people. This doesn't have to feel like an overwhelming amount of people, especially not if you're an introvert like me. I always just think about one curious career conversation every month. That's all I'm ever aiming for. I actually had one this week. And it's so interesting because they never feel like a priority, because your day job can be so demanding of you, and your to-do list can be sort of flashing at you. You'll often think, oh, I just haven't got time for that, because it never feels, from a short-term perspective, you're not going to get the kind of the reward. But I think you have to continually remind yourself, you just never know where those relationships can take you. And that we're actually going to do a podcast episode in a couple of weeks on career karma. And I have found again and again, if you recognize that the relationships you build in your squiggly career belong to you, and even if you just do one curious career conversation every month, like, I'm going to commit to you, that career karma will pay off. You don't always know how or when, but it will. You'll have to hold me to account in 10 years if it doesn't, but pretty much the feedback I get is it is always worth it. And yeah, I think one a month does feel achievable, but I probably don't do more than one a month. So I always think 12 new people by the end of the year, I'll feel good about myself. Next thing you can always control is, like, what are you learning? How are you either developing in different directions or making your strengths stronger? Maybe you want to do both, but often we have to kind of make some choices, don't we? We can't do everything at the same time. So I'm always trying to be really clear about, am I trying to broaden my skill set at the moment? Do I want to, when I'm thinking about my career possibilities, are there some skills that I want to sort of over-invest in because I've got some career scenarios in mind and I can imagine those skills are going to be useful in all of those career scenarios, in which case I'm going to over-invest in them. And that might not be one of my strengths. That might be maybe me thinking about, I don't know, some technology that I think is going to be useful in career development. And I might think, well, that's going to be useful regardless of what job I'm doing in 10 years' time. So how do I upskill myself on understanding that technology, on using that technology, maybe building some relationships that are going to help me learn about that technology? Or maybe I'm trying to make a strength stronger. So maybe I'm thinking, well, one of the things that I'm great at is developing ideas, creating things from scratch, coming up with doing things that people have not done before. How could I challenge myself to be even better at that? Who are the go-to gurus in terms of creativity and ideas in particular? Who could I go and spend time with? Who could I be learning from? What am I reading, watching, listening to? Who's the best in the world at that? Because you'll never be the best. So find the people who are the best and kind of try and learn from them. So I always think your skills and your strengths, you are at least to some extent in control of whether you are upskilling, reskilling, making your strengths stronger. As much as you can do that in your day job, of course, start with your day job. It's where you're spending loads of time. So do it as much as you can kind of in your world already in terms of your working day, because I do think back to energy, if you're having to do all of this outside of your day job, it is a hard ask of yourself in terms of your energy. So anything you can do in your day job, do it. And then you might be very specific about one thing you want to commit to outside of your day job, whether that is something you could do at lunchtime, whether that's something you could do one evening for 1 hour. Could you learn with someone else? Often a bit like doing exercise, I find. I'm way more likely to do exercise if someone is relying on me or kind of waiting for me. Like if Tuesday night, it was chuck it down with rain. Did I want to go and play netball in the pouring rain? I was like watching the rain fall outside my window for like 2 hours. And I was thinking the last thing I want to do is go out in that rain at 7:50 in the evening. So it's also quite late, by then I'm like, oh, but kind of watching Netflix and a bit of chocolate and a nice cup of tea feels really appealing right now. But I'm going to turn up because I've got 6 other people relying on me. And I think the same sort of goes for learning. Like, can you create that accountability partners that we sometimes talk about? And again, you can control that. There'll always be other people who want to learn with you and learn some of the same things that you want to learn. On that, actually, just to show that we genuinely do practice what we preach, Helen and I have signed up together to do this new type of meditation that I can't even remember what it's called. Helen researched it, and they've described it as meditation for people who can't meditate. So in One PodPlus, I'm sure at some point, because we turn everything into content, and Helen's already just like, oh, we'll be able to do a podcast episode on this. We are gonna have a go at learning something new together. Because I read about how important mindfulness and meditation is all the time, and I've never quite understood how I can make that work for me. DDD stands for developing in different directions or making your strength stronger. And then the last thing just to think about is just thinking about, if you've got something that's important to you, are you taking that create rather than wait mindset when it comes to your career? So if you said to me, it's really important to me to ... And then I said to you, okay, so what action can you point to in the last month that has helped you to make some progress on that thing? What is that action? So sometimes I think we can get quite passive in our careers, and we get passive for really understandable reasons, not because we don't care, but because we are busy, because there's loads of other things happening, because we get distracted, because our lives are full and you've got loads of stuff that you're trying to make happen. But I just think having that focus sometimes can be really helpful. Like, yeah, how would you end that sentence? In my career at the moment, it is important to me that I ... Great, know what's important to you. And then I've made progress on that in the last month by ... So that you're really clear about how your intent and your impact are coming together. We've talked before about this idea about intent and impact. We need those things to come together. If you've just got intent, you won't make progress. Good to have intent because it means you've got clarity about what's most important to you. But then the impact comes from the actions that you will take. If you want to borrow some brilliance, have a listen to Claire Smythe on Desert Island Discs. I was listening to her story, and I think she demonstrates how you take control of your career. She is the only female 3 Michelin star chef. She has worked for some of the best chefs and Gordon Ramsay, who sounds very tricky to work for. But you know, sometimes you just think from an adjacent world, you can borrow some brilliance. And I think if you listen to Claire, you just hear someone who has taken an incredible amount of control of her career, even when her family wanted to do something very different, even when it felt really hard, even when she got no money. So if you want just an inspiring listen, there's an example for you. So I hope for everybody, if this was your first time, that has felt useful. Useful is our #1 value, so that's always what we're showing up trying to do. I hope you've all enjoyed the chat. I can see everybody was helping each other, which is always really lovely to see. And I hope it's been a good way to start your Thursday. See you next week, where we'll be talking about how to make difficult decisions in your career. And we have a framework and a model to talk through that actually both Helen and I got very on board with. So hope to see lots of you next week. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday mornings with us. Bye, everybody.